Welcome to BWI Live, and more importantly, happy 4-day weekend, I think, for a lot of people going around. The 4th of July falling on a Thursday, which if there's a perfect day for a holiday to fall on, it's a Thursday. Because then Friday, blah, 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 blah. We're still going to be working. We're going to still be providing you content over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. But, you know, it's the holiday season, so we are here live doing the BWI Live recruiting show on Wednesday so that we can have a little bit of time with our families and friends, cooking out and all those things. Fitz, I know you're a big barbecue guy. I know you love to grill some meat. So what's on tap for tomorrow over at your household?
Man, I haven't gotten there yet. I have no idea what I'm going to make right now. I got a big pack of chicken thighs in the fridge, and that's all I'm focused on right now. I'm going 1-0 today, and then I'll worry about tomorrow. No, I have no idea. My wife has not told me our plans yet, and I'm completely fine with that. I'll be honest.
Well, I like it. I like the flexibility. Also, like you said, focus on the day, go 1-0, get on to tomorrow, and be able to succeed there as well. Ryan Snyder going above and beyond to be on the show today. Appreciate you being here. With all the moving around and things, we have different schedules, and people have different parts of their life that could interfere with that. But yes, the show is here together.
Children. Key word. Children. It's all good. Yeah, they're home. They're home for the couple days. So it's fine. We'll make it work. No big deal. Happy 4th of July weekend, everybody. This is always a love-hate relationship this weekend if you're a recruiting reporter, because a lot of guys like to decide around now. And of course, I want to go have a cookout tomorrow, right? Or, do the things that the rest of the world, or rest of the country, I should say, is doing. Penn State actually had it. I was looking at it earlier today. They haven't had a July 4th commitment in a little while, the last couple of years.
22?
But I remember.
Maybe?
Yeah, I think it was 2021 was the year.
Yeah.
But I remember like it was yesterday, because it was like J.P. Nelson, Keon Wiley, Caleb Artis, Zane Durant, and Nick Singleton, all from like Friday to Tuesday. And of course, like I think July 4th was maybe a Saturday or Sunday that year. So it just was one of those weekends where, everybody's got all these plans, and all those guys decided to rapid fire commitments at us. So that has still scarred me 3 years later. But it's been a couple years since we've had to work a lot on July 4th. So we'll take it.
Hopefully the regular gang finds the show today, tried to get out the information. But if you know somebody who isn't here that normally is, Ryan Sheard is almost always here. Let them know. Just remind them that, hey, the recruiting show is going live on Wednesday, not on Thursday. And while you're at it, subscribe to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. And of course, hit the notification so that you get all the information when any of those things happen. If there are commitments, we'll be talking about them. So all that great stuff on the way. But let's get into the latest news. Get right into it after 3 minutes of preamble. Get right into it, guys. The latest RPM pick, Fitz. He promoted this yesterday at the end of the show. He teased you with it. You went to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com to find out that information. Today, we're going to dive in a little bit more on this particular conversation. So, Fitz, what's going on with you on the front of the next Nittany Lion you think is going to join the class?
Yeah, I put a pick in yesterday, LeVar Arrington II. If the name sounds familiar, his father, LeVar Arrington I, played linebacker at Penn State. He was pretty good back in the day. So it's a situation where Penn State has recruited him for a while. They've recruited him as a linebacker, defensive athlete type guy. Like he's got an interesting frame. He's 6'3 plus. He's 205, 210, somewhere in there. He's eventually going to be I don't know if he'll be an edge. I don't know if he'll be a linebacker. It's hard to say. But with DJ McClary out of the class, you get a little bit more flexibility, kind of the same with Deshaun Burnett. Yeah. So he's a defensive athlete is what we're going to call him. Penn State hosted him the final weekend of June, also visited Tennessee and UCLA. Heard a lot of Penn State UCLA head-to-head here at the end. But obviously, you got those bloodlines. There's a lot to like in those bloodlines, for sure. And Penn State thinks he's a good player. Like, that's the thing. Like, you look at, there was a question on the board yesterday. Is this a political take? Well, Keno Arrington was at Lackawanna and Penn State didn't take him. Jimmy Kennedy's son was offered, but not really pursued. There's I think political offers, obviously. But like, if you're going to use a roster spot, if you're going to use a scholarship roster spot, you better be damn sure that kid can play at this level. And, not everybody's going to pan out, but like, they think that he can play at this level. So I think, You've got an intriguing athlete. It's going to take probably a while for him to for that all to come together with that size, with that sort of lankiness. The length is good enough to play defensive end. I mean, it's not extraordinary by any means, but like it's good enough to play defensive end. So I like the fact that, they're taking a chance on a guy that can, in 2 or 3 years look like a different guy. And
a lot of hybrid players in this class. I guess the thought that comes to mind because of his kind of pursuit skills and that tweener body type. I'm not trying to make a direct comparison to talent level, but is there a conversation where we could talk about Tony Rojas in a similar light of a guy who was very fast for defensive end, was obviously going to be a linebacker, and I think that's what you're saying the difference is, where you think there's a possibility that Arrington could play that edge role, maybe a hybrid role. But is there a comparison there from a traits perspective if you're like squinting a little bit?
I think you're squinting a lot there. I don't love it. Tony was, I mean, there's these kind of athletes that you see as linebacker, defensive end, and you put him on offense, he's probably a tight end. Tony played running back, so like he's a little bit more agile, a little bit more. Yeah, it's tough to compare anybody to Tony. Like he's a tremendous athlete.
I knew I was stepping on a minefield when I asked the question, but it's a defensive end, a guy who plays defensive end in high school, who maybe play linebacker at the next level. So that's what made me think of it. That's all.
Yeah, it's tough to come up with a comparison to that. He's not Cam Brown. He's not tall and lanky like that guy, but I think he's somewhere in the middle there. So let me stew away on that. Let me think about if there's a comparison that's on the roster that maybe it's been through here. But there's been guys that have fit that mold. It's just nothing's jumping to the top of my head.
Ryan, what do you think of the situation with Arrington and his recruitment and kind of the story that's happened so far with that and his dad and all of the things that are wrapped up in what is a pretty emotional recruiting process for Penn State fans? I can't imagine what it's like for the family.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, LeVar's just so involved with Penn State. Obviously, Dad is so involved with Penn State, and that's always why, in the end, I was like, man, if Penn State has spot for him. Which we kind of learned, I think, maybe about 3-4 months ago. I felt like maybe it was like February-ish, maybe in the March. We're like, oh yeah, they're serious about, not junior, but LeVar Arrington II.
It's tough.
Yeah, there's a real
junior, isn't it?
I know, right? It's so hard to like put
right.
But put senior in the stories and stuff. Anyway, it just always felt like, okay, if they're going to go all out here, like this really should go in Penn State's direction. So, we'll see. It's not done yet, obviously, but both Sean and I feel pretty good about where that's trending. Two things that are interesting to me was, the schools that it came down to, UCLA and Tennessee. Both of them have like Penn State connections. I mean, Brian Norwood's out on the staff out there. Brian Norwood was at Penn State, not when LeVar was there. I think he was like 2000, 2001. It was a little after, right? Yeah. But I mean, I don't know how much that connection played a part or not, but I find it interesting that LeVar Arrington's son, that when the top three schools came down to it, it was a connection. There's some connections with UCLA. Obviously, Lynn has moved on to USC now, but that was part of it to get that recruitment started. And then at Tennessee, you got Andrew Goodman and Tim Banks too. Two more Penn State guys at Tennessee. I think there might even be another recruiting analyst there as well from Penn State. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I just thought that was interesting, just because of LeVar's connections to Penn State, because of, how entwined he is with the program, that his son ends up looking at two other schools that, have some Penn State connections as well. But we'll see where this goes. I don't know if it's I don't know the date. Was LeVar teasing July 4th on the radio show? Is that that's what fans seem to think may be the case? We'll see.
I've never tried to interpret LeVar. I think it's a dangerous game to try and do so.
Yeah.
And I stay away from that personally, because LeVar's a character, man. He's one of a kind. We'll say that.
So if you want to get more information and some of the things we're going to be talking about here on the show today, you want to get that information first and you want to get it complete, go to bluewhiteillustrated.com, sign up right now, 2 months for $1, code PSU1. Recruiting information, there's one place to get it, and that's bluewhiteillustrated.com. We talk about stuff that we go into depth and detail, including watch-alongs of prospects, getting the information and the inside access to conversations with recruits. These guys are the most sourced individuals in Penn State recruiting that can give you the accurate of like, this is the temperature in the room. So check out what they have going on. We're going to be getting into some of those conversations, some of those articles in the show today. But
Frank,
the other thing,
before we get into that, I'm sorry, I've been going through commit list the whole time. it's kind of like a Brandon Smith type thing. He's not the athlete that Brandon Smith was, but like, I think Brandon Smith always would have been a better defensive end. So maybe if he gets there, I mean, 6'3.5", Brandon was, pretty well built when he came through, but obviously built himself up and eventually became a draft pick. But like one of those guys that's sort of in that hybrid mode, and you got to find the best fit. And, with Brandon Smith, that can be argued yes or no. I'm not sure. And this is not that show, but like in terms of body type, in terms of a long, lanky guy that you could put on the end, but also not the longest guy. Like he doesn't have 34-inch arms or anything like that. Sorry, I had to get that out there before we move on.
No, it's good. Yeah, I think that's a good comparison. And comps like that, even ones that are wrong, like Tony Rojas, that start a conversation that maybe get us to the right place. Everyone loves comps. Everyone loves recruiting conversation. And one guy who loves it more than anybody, I would say, is Andy Ludicky from My Perfect Franchise, because he chooses to advertise on this particular show because he's a recruiting fanatic. He loves recruiting. He's a Texas guy, but he loves the conversation around athletes and their choices at the next level. If you want to talk about your choices at the next level, the next step in your life, whether you want to build a legacy for your family, you're looking to break out of your current situation, or you want a side hustle. If you have corporate experience, management experience, or you're an expert in a particular trade and or business sector, talk to Andy, because he can start making you putting you in a situation where you're making money for you and not for somebody else. He's going to share all the insights in business ownership and franchise ownership because he has done it. He's gone through all of this stuff. He's got 6+ years of experience of running multiple businesses, including the hard things. Hiring a friend that you think is going to be great, and then you got to see that guy in church after you had to fire him. All those things. He can teach you about the ins and the outs, and he'll even point you in the right direction of what he thinks you should be managing based on all those things we just talked about of your skill sets and your expertise. And by the way, that is also talking you out of ideas that aren't very good, whether it's a business that isn't very good or one that doesn't fit those needs. It's not just about copy paste putting you into a program like everybody else, individually tailored to help you find the right spot. If that is something you're interested in, 404-973-9901 for our podcast listeners. And for our YouTube friends that are watching the show, you can see it on the screen, but I'll read it for you because I'm a nice guy. Andy at myperfectfranchise.net is where you go to email him as well. Appreciate Andy being a sponsor, a longtime sponsor here on the show. So the next thing we got to talk about, guys, is the conversation that Ryan had this week. A great insight. Kind of, we're gonna take the next couple of minutes to recap things that happened in June, starting with Ryan's conversation with Max Granville and his dad, Billy Granville. Ryan, I believe you talked to both, correct? Like I saw two different articles. Okay, so
we got another one tomorrow too.
Awesome.
We talked a lot. Yeah,
and we're lucky that Ryan's not on a minutes plan like they used to be with cell phones, because I believe he was on for quite a while.
It was an hour. Yeah, it was about an hour between the two. There was two separate calls, but Dad and I talked probably like 45 minutes, which was awesome.
He seemed like he had a lot to say, and if you want to read those articles again, bluewhiteillustrated.com. But what are the things that stood out to you?
Well, when you're a former NFL player, you have the cachet to speak on a lot of these things, right? And we talk to a lot of parents who, they go through the recruiting process with their kids, but they don't have the background of, they went through it themselves. They got to the NFL, all those kind of things. For perspective, Billy Granville played for the Cincinnati Bengals for about 4 years. He also went to Duke, played linebacker there. I forget the exact years, but long story short, like getting that conversation with him really kind of opened my eyes a lot to, how well-versed they are as far as how college football works, but also, and this will be in part 2 tomorrow for our subscribers, but like how NIL and different kind of things, sure, it's nice, but that's not the end goal. And I think for so many other recruits, like that's becoming a big focus. And for them, it was like, no, our focus is to make you the best player you can be, so you could potentially get the big prize at the end, which of course is being an NFL draft pick. So just there was so many topics we hit on, right? From Penn State's defensive scheme, how they've used Chop Robinson and some other defensive ends over the years who, don't maybe have the size of a Deni Dennis Sutton, but are quicker, twitchier, really able to wreak havoc off the edge. And I think that's a massive reason why Penn State got Max Granville in the end. I think it may be the biggest reason why, honestly, because of that success they've had with everybody going back to Adolphe Owe. Adisa was a little bit bigger, but there are some other examples in there as well. So I think that was massive. I think the connection with Tom Allen was something that I didn't really know about. I felt like that on the OV kind of played a big role because they knew Deion Barnes pretty well. James was pretty aggressive in going down and visiting them at times during different contact periods. But one thing I never really knew about was, how much he respected Tom Allen and how that played a role. So there's so many things in there. I mean, we could go all day on different topics, different things. I think the best thing to do is just to read it. And we appreciate those who subscribe and check it out because, I hit on as many topics as you can within 45 minutes. And his dad beyond elaborated on a lot of those things from, what Max does well, which by the way, this will be in tomorrow's part too, but like what was so interesting to me is I'm like, hey, you're an NFL player. Like, when you see your son, what comes natural? I'm thinking, twitch, use of hands. I'm thinking the athletic things, right? And I think we talk about testing numbers on stuff so many times. And he wanted nothing to do with that. It was all about the intangible things. It's all about, his determination, his love for the game and the different things that will separate him in the long run, from, maybe not the super freak athletes of the world, but, why these little intangible things are what separates guys from being good college football players to eventually get in the NFL and lasting. So there's just so many little things there that I learned, talking to a former NFL player, talking to somebody who really has a good understanding for the recruiting process. And I think a lot of fans are going to take away those same kind of things, those same talking points or things to learn, I guess is the best way to put it.
I find it interesting that you mentioned that, and having watched Deion Barnes coach, all those things are kind of some of the tenets of what I've seen from him as a coach, of the details, making sure that you understand what you're doing and those hard work things, not necessarily just run really fast around the edge. Fitz, when it comes to Deion Barnes in this situation, we've been wondering, there's the evidence of him being a very valuable assistant, and then there is the first year of his full recruiting process. You can't see this as anything other than a major win to be able to convince a recruit that was from the Southeast to Southwest or wherever you want to put Texas.
Texas is his own thing.
Coming north, like that is a thing. That feels like a thing.
Yeah, massive, absolutely massive. I mean, you look. So here's the thing with Deion, and you could say the same about Ty Howell. You can say the same about any young coach. Is they're going to, when they get elevated to a position like that so early in their career, without the, he didn't skip steps, but without the experience. He didn't go to Miami, Ohio. He didn't go to the MAC to test his chops and build himself back up. I mean, he did a heck of a job at Penn State. He did enough of a job at Penn State in his first job that he didn't need to go that route. But you still don't have the experience. You still don't have the general knowledge. Going head to head with Larry Johnson is not something that you want a young recruiter to do, just because he has not learned those lessons yet. And he will learn those lessons. And he has learned quite a bit. Like he's, this has been a really good couple of weeks for defensive line recruiting, but you look back earlier in the cycle, Trent Wilson's gone, Darian Inkamana's gone. Like you've got a lot of guys that went elsewhere. Zahir Mathis, whom he's known since he was a middle schooler, and I was committed to Ohio State. So he's picked up on some of these lessons because of these older coaches. They know what buttons to push. They know how to negative recruit Deion Barnes. And I know I'm not saying that in a bad light, like, cause that's what, that's recruiting. But he's going to learn some of these lessons. And for him to learn these lessons, but also pick up a player like Max Granville, that's pretty promising right there. So he's going to lose guys like all young coaches do. Call it naivety, call it whatever you want. But there are going to be lessons that have to be learned in this situation. Like not everybody walks in as an ace recruiter right away. And even those guys that you hear are ace recruiters, they lose these battles too. Like it's a situation where, hey, you're going to get the wool pulled over your eyes and you don't even realize it till that kid is committed elsewhere. It happens. But Deion's been able to pivot. You've got Max Granville. You've got Jaden Woods. You've got guys that are coming in from other parts of the country because of the reputation that you've been a part of building. Like, let's not forget, he's been here for a while. So he's been here for Chop. He was here for AK when he was here. The laundry list of defensive ends he's had a hand in developing, not necessarily as the 1A guy, but the laundry list of defensive ends that he's been able to build has been pretty good for a 20-something year old. I don't know if he's 30 yet, but it's been impressive, but it's a continued evolution of what he's going to be as a recruiter. And that's the promising part for him to see a position like defensive end where there's, I don't want to say nothing in the region, but there's not much in the region. Cortez Harris is a good player, and he's like, what, third or fourth best defensive end in this region. It's a down year, and that's fine. But he had to go elsewhere, go find something else, go work with other things. Ryan, we were sitting there in January and we were talking about defensive ends, and we weren't sure where Penn State was going to go. And you had Max Granville listed as a linebacker. Well, we got feedback that basically anybody that recruited Max Granville as a linebacker wasn't going to be on the list. And then we got some feedback that, hey, Penn State's been recruiting him as a defensive end. So for able to be able to pivot, to do all these things successfully, it's an absolutely massive win for Deion Barnes. It's promising for the future. Now he's going to continue to have lessons to be learned. Right now at defensive tackle, I saw there was a defensive tackle question in the chat. Like, there are lessons to be learned. A couple of his top targets went off the board early. Now you're looking to Florida for your top targets. Now Jarquez Carter is a really, really important prospect. You're going up against Larry Johnson. I'm not sure what Ohio State's situation is. They seem to have caught up with the NIL, which is reflected in their defensive line class, the run that they're on. So that's pretty tough. But at the same time, on the back end of that, do they have room for Jarquez Carter? I don't know that answer. Miami just hosted him. They feel pretty good about where he's at. So this is a big battle against number one, Larry Johnson, your mentor, and Ohio State, which is just another world basically, and then Miami, which is not far from Jarquez Carter. Florida seems to be out of it. UCF is still hanging around, but that would be a very, very big get. Probably not quite. What do you think, Ryan? Not quite on the level of Max Granville, but still very, very important.
I have Granville as their most important get of the year, just because of a lot of ways, what he represents and how important that position is, and a lot of things like that. But yeah, Carter would be top 5 for sure, in my opinion.
So, and there's going to be those situations going forward. By the way, Mario Cristobal at Miami, a renowned recruiter. In fact, that's really what's gotten him a lot of his success. Maybe not so much the coaching, but the recruiting has been excellent. So some tough competition for that and for some of those players in Florida, which if you want more information on Florida recruiting, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Fitz put something up yesterday about an updated recruiting situation in that area. So go check that out on the website as well. But Ryan,
Deion Barnes is 31.
31?
31. Yeah, I looked it up.
He's still a kid to me, man. Like, I remember.
It's weird, right?
Yeah, that was, man, 31. Okay, great. We're all getting old.
Well, speak for yourself. He's only 2 years younger than me. I want to circle back to something that...
So T-Frank's a kid now, I guess.
I guess so.
Yeah, totally. I don't know what you guys are talking about. It's been going great this year. It's been going great. Definitely don't feel old at all. Ryan, one of the things that came up in the conversation, and you mentioned it here, of like, he's definitely not a linebacker, but there seems to be a certain amount of self-awareness from, and I know the whole story, but that's not what I want to focus on. What I want to focus on
the
here
story's so funny, though. I didn't ask Dad about that yesterday, Sean. I should have asked.
So now that we don't want to talk about inside jokes here on the show, Ryan had a conversation about Max Granville as a linebacker, and Dad found out about it and was very adamant that Max is a defensive end. And that is what I want to talk about, though, is that despite saying, hey, my son is a defensive end, this is what we see for his future, they also seem to be aware of what he is. And you mentioned that maybe he's not denied Dennis Sutton, but they wanted to find a program that maximizes his ability. There seems to be, while a belief, also a self-awareness that isn't going to get in the way of that development. Is that fair from what your conversation was like and what you learned from Dad and from Max?
I think so. I mean, look, he's just under 6'3", 225. A lot of ways, he'll get up to that. He could end up being, is Abdul's a little taller, right? How tall is Abdul? Yeah, Abdul's a little taller.
6.5,
yeah. But I mean, a lot of ways that there's a lot of examples of how Penn State's they've been able to use those guys. I mean, one of the talks we were having yesterday was about how the SEC, many of the SEC schools were kind of looking for more denied Dennis Sutton types, guys that can be 270 plus and kind of thicker, stronger. And I don't want to say it was a turnoff for them. They did say that Tennessee was one of the schools that, was really kind of recruiting more like how Penn State is, which I find ironic because that's Tim Banks is, oversees that defense. Yeah. But it just, I think that was the best way to put it. not a turnoff for the way those schools were recruiting or what they were looking for, but it just they had to find the right fit. They had to find the perfect fit. And Oklahoma has had some examples of making those guys work. But he was saying, when we sat down and watched film at not Penn State, but every other school, like Penn State was like an hour-long session of just example after example after example. And they were like, dude, we went to other schools and they couldn't really provide much more than a handful of minutes of their current guys, showing the examples of how they use, players of Max's size and strengths and athleticism, all that kind of stuff. So I think that was just massive in the end. And really it was the biggest thing that got this over the line.
Was there anything we talked a lot about what Billy Granville had to say. Is there anything that Max said that stood out to you that's interesting that you wanted to throw here in the show?
They were very open. Both of them were open about, like, he almost committed to Oklahoma. And, there's a reason we talked about Oklahoma for 6+ months. And it's because he almost committed to Oklahoma in January. I think his dad explained this to me. This wasn't from Max, but basically the way they were explaining it was like, he was at a junior day. The coaches, I wouldn't say they were pressing him, but, they knew they were checking off the right boxes, is the way his dad explained it. He doesn't commit while he's there. He says, we'll circle back in 2 weeks. And then when they do that in early February, basically Max's response was, I'm really close, but there's one school I still need to see. And that ended up being Penn State, which then snowballs into this March unofficial visit that they took, which they stayed for, I think, 2+ days. And that really is what changed it. And Max was saying, like, his first day up at Penn State, he was like, I like it, but it's not probably enough to get me from the South. But then they sit down with Barnes, they go through all this film, they show all these different scheme fits, and that's where he left there saying, okay, I'm going to take an official visit to Penn State, and now they are absolutely top 2, 3, and somebody I need to keep building a relationship with and learning more about. So mom then brings him back for the OV, of course. His dad stayed home with one of their other sons, but mom comes up and dad was saying, like, mom wasn't really too keen on the distance, right? And she just had to learn it for herself. And he basically said she was kind of skeptical going into that OV. And by the time she left, she had the same conclusions as dad, which is that this is probably the best fit from him from a culture perspective, scheme perspective, all those kind of things. So, that wasn't from Max. Yeah, I know what you were asking more so for Max, but I thought it was notable and just kind of the path that got here. And Max even admitted then that at one point Baylor was actually kind of his favorite, which he took an OV to Baylor in April. And I guess that kind of stuck with him a bit. But really, once Penn State took that OV, USC gave him something to think about. And, of course, it was really hard for him to say no to Oklahoma, but it came down to really culture, scheme, that blue collar mentality, add it with Penn State success at defensive ends. And that's why he's planning to wear the blue and white in a couple years.
It's an interesting thing here that former NFL players, their sons, not all of them, have at least gravitated to Penn State for some of those reasons. And I guess Fitz, in the NIL boogeyman era, is this, you can't make a recruiting living of former NFL players' sons going to your program, but is this an area you think that is a strength for Penn State that they can continue to capitalize on of, hey, you'll get something from the experience at Penn State, but we prepare you for the next level. And I guess if there's a position where you're interested to see if that can develop outside of defensive end, which, as we've talked about here, aces across the board in terms of the way they've developed guys to get to the NFL. Is there an area where Penn State could capitalize on that kind of in this ecosystem they're in now?
The more that it's about football and the less that it's about money, the better Penn State will be off. And I don't know the financial situation, but typically when a guy plays in the NFL, they've got something in the bank, and that helps them with their decision making. That doesn't absolve NIL, doesn't take money out of the equation, but like the more that you're looking for the right things, the stuff that they made this decision on 20 years ago, then the better off Penn State's going to be. And that's a bit of a catch-22, because obviously you need in this climate, we see what Oregon's doing right now, and they're playing a different ball game than everybody else, and they're taking guys from Texas and Ohio State, the schools that Penn State's chasing with NIL. It's a very interesting ecosystem there. But as I put on my OWG hat, like when the guys are making the decisions for the right reasons, like the reasons that they've always made these decisions, they tend to be more successful. Like, it is a situation where if you're looking, my comparison for Max Granville is not a defensive end. It's Parker Washington. It is evaluating the situation in front of him to maximize his potential for the long run, because that's when the real money comes in. I mean, the NIL is great. Like, guys should have been getting paid. We're not doing that conversation right now, but the money that they have the potential to make down the road as an NFL player is the real money. And that's the situation that guys are looking for. When they're looking for the right things, that's the situations they're looking for. So I think that's an off-topic rant, but you're going to be more successful when you find those things. And that's the part of recruiting that kills me, is not that money's involved or anything like that, but you're changing your dreams based on potential earnings for the next 3 or 4 years. And that's tough to stomach for somebody that's covered this for so long and has been watching it for so long, is that when your dream changes because of a couple $100,000, and that's nothing to a ton of these kids. Absolutely. I get it. But when your dreams change because of it, then your outlook probably does as well.
I know we've camped on this conversation for a while. Appreciate your insight and kind of squeezing this lemon for a little more juice, because I think that there's a lot of different areas where this touches this particular conversation, and you guys did an awesome job getting all of that out. Now, the next thing is to look back a little bit. The conversation we just had is a part of what we learned in June from Ryan, who wrote this monthly recap at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. What we're going to do is we're going to look back at June, and we're also going to look forward to July, because we had the conversation, Ryan, that we were going to talk about the recruiting rules changes at some other date, but it does matter in July, at least in the near future. So let's start with June. And I'm going to read you your headline from the top of your article that says the class of 2025 will be just fine. Why did you write that, and what did you mean?
I'm just trying to stress, like, I think a lot of fans have wondered for a while, like, is this class below average? And I think it's exactly what it has been for the last couple of years. And it will continue to be for the foreseeable future. Well, maybe, I guess, if collective bargaining comes, and maybe could change a couple things. But in my eyes, like, look, with NIL and a lot of things, and you're at an Oregon and USC, like, Penn State is consistently going to be a 3, 4, 5 ranked team in recruiting in the Big Ten for the foreseeable future. They have been the last 2 years since NIL has been prevalent, and I just don't see that changing. And that's really what we're seeing again this year. They're ranked 13th in the country right now. There's some schools below them who don't have the amount of commitments and all that right now that will probably bump up a little bit. And I think we're going to see Penn State finish right around 15, 16, which is where they've been the last, couple of years. So that's kind of what I was trying to stress is, well, obviously they, in June, they also added like 7 4-star players. So it has bumped up the perception of the class. Fans were a little bit worried, I think, before some of these guys jumped on board, but I see the same pattern kind of repeating itself, which is that Penn State's going to get guys that fit Penn State. And they're going to pull out some guys that we don't necessarily expect. Max Granville's, Darius Dixon's of the world, those kind of guys that I shouldn't say maybe always surprise us, but to some degree they do. And they're going to finish right where they always kind of have finished. So that's kind of just really what I was trying to stress by that. We'll see. The other part in that article, one of the other things I had in that article was also, by the way, we learned a lot about 2026 this past month, and the region's pretty good. I mean, they might have 4 5-star guys within the region this year, because I think Kevin Brown absolutely deserves that recognition, and he's right on the border of it. So we'll see what happens. But obviously Zion Ellie, Manu Iheanacho, they're both already 5-star players, and they'll probably stay up there. So just kind of was stressing the different things we learned, from camps and all that kind of stuff for 2026. And then I have to add the caveat, which was also NIL is going to have a big impact on a lot of those top guys at the end of that 2026 part. But
right.
I just think fans, it's all about your perception, man. Like, I understand the segment of the fan base that says Penn State has all the resources in the world, they should be competing for national championships. I understand that completely. But guess what? They haven't been for a long time now. And I understand why fans want more, always expect more. But I also think when you realize where this program's at right now, what they've consistently done, even going back well before James Franklin, they're pretty much where they should be, which is 3rd, 4th in the Big Ten consistently recruiting wise, on the bubble of college football playoffs. Maybe they will crack that and some things will open, for them moving forward. But this is what I expect to happen. And it's all about how you perceive it, whether you accept it or look at it negatively.
Fitz, do you have anything you want to add to that conversation?
No, it's pretty good. I think Ryan hit it. It's going to finish about where it always finishes, and it's going to take a different route to get there. And it's going to be interesting to watch. Double-sided here. It's going to be interesting to watch the guys that they have committed from far away as signing day gets closer, and it's going to be interesting to watch some of the guys that they've lost to other programs, maybe that aren't in the region, like as signing day gets closer. So we will see how this all levels out, and I still think Penn State be, ballpark 15th, right? Ryan, is that what we're saying? Like, right around 14, 15, where they've always been.
Here's a question about that, because at their peak, they can peak in a specific year that's a quality year in the region into the top 5. We've seen that in 2022, but also in 23. I think we don't talk enough about how good that class was and the styles of players that they have in that particular group. So does NIL or any of these situations with the new Big Ten blunt their ability to get to those upper levels of finishing 11th or finishing 10th or cracking into the top 10? Or is that a year-by-year basis, Ryan?
I think if Penn State fans need to just get used to Ohio State and Oregon always being top 10 or top 10 national, top 2 schools in the Big Ten. Would you agree with that, Sean? Like, that is going to be...
The way that Oregon's going right now, I don't know if it's sustainable, but whew, boy.
Like, you need... Sorry to cut you off, Sean. You need to have that in your mind that they are always going to be probably finishing the top of the recruiter ranking. So Penn State's ceiling, in my eyes, when we're just talking Big Ten, is really third. And that some years that could be maybe 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. Some years that it can maybe crack the top 10. But you just, you got to have guys that fit your program. And, we're just seeing with so many guys in the region or really all up and down the East Coast, really all over the country, there are a lot of guys who fit the program, but now also are getting offers of double, sometimes 2.5 times what Penn State is willing to offer guys. And it's all comes down to Penn State's mentality of, hey, look, we're going to reward the guys who earn it. And those are the guys who are going to, probably end up making, not, we'll say multiple hundreds of thousands. I don't know what their money is, but that's Penn State's mentality. And that's how they keep their roster intact for the most part. Sure, they've had some years where they have quite a few guys go out, but, they've done better than a lot of other schools.
They haven't lost a Quinshon Judkins in that situation, right? So they've lost King Mack, which I think is the biggest blow. Keandre Lambert-Smith, they've lost those. But really, I was looking at West Virginia and whether this is a fair comparison or not. I was doing some season preview, and for the second year in a row, they have massive turnover. Like half their roster, it feels like, is in the portal, and then they're shuffling players from other schools back on the roster. And Penn State has avoided a lot of that attrition, good and bad, so they don't have a ton of spots to add in the transfer portal, but they've been selective. And I think that you guys have pointed out, it bears out that if you take care of the guys on your roster, that stability is still possible. But then the question becomes, like, competing and recruiting, et cetera, et cetera. Alan Saunders makes a good point here. He says nothing wrong with wanting money. With most of these players, the only money they'll ever earn from football is NIL money. I think that's a great point. That is absolutely, and folds in the conversation about Max Granville and his family having the ability to say, okay, we can not take every dollar and maximize it because Max has NFL potential. A lot of these guys in these situations do, but not all of them will achieve those goals in the end. So was there other things that we learned in June, Fitz? I know this wasn't specifically your article, but any big takeaways from June that you thought were pertinent to bring up on the show today?
I think just following back up to your last question, you asked about the reasonable expectation of pushing into like the top 10. I think the thing that's going to keep Penn State out of there is some of those top guys, and that's those are the guys going for the top dollar. Got the guys that are able to leverage what they have, and more power to them for doing that. But when you figure out what the market is, and when you take into account who you're going up against, when you take into account, like as Ryan said, 2 to 2.5 times, that's a ton. Like that's a ton of money. And sometimes you just got to throw your hand up and say, I can't compete with that. And you hate to hear that. You hate to do that as a competitor, as a fan, as a coach, as anything. Like it's frustrating as anything. But you definitely have those situations, and that's going to be, you used to build around, you remember that 2020, excuse me, I'm a decade off each way. The 2018 class, like building around Micah, building around those guys that were at the top of that board, at the top of those rankings. And then you go from there. Does this class have the ability to bring in those guys right now? I'm not sure that it does. I mean, you've got some really good players that are still left on the board, but like you're not chomping at the bit for the 5 stars and things like that.
And even 2022, man, like 2022 was the first year NIL really got rolling. Like that was the Texas A&M mega class, but it wasn't a national thing then. Like there were some pockets, A&M, some others who were like, all right, we're going to just embrace this from a recruiting perspective and see what happens. But not everybody was doing that. But when I look back, like obviously Drew Aller like fits the program well. Nick Singleton fits the program well. Denai fits, like they are Penn State guys. But Denai Dennis Sutton, remember, like he wasn't that far off from Georgia. And if NIL was as prevalent as it is now, like maybe that changes. You don't know. So I mean, I agree with what Sean's saying, like 2018, but like even that 2022 class could have been a bit different. You got Caden Saunders, Drew Shelton, Katron Allen. You got a lot of guys in there that were top 150 prospects. That, right now, I mean, Penn State's top player in the class is like 137. Why is that? Well, that's because a lot of the top 100 guys are getting crazy money thrown at them.
Yeah.
To be blunt.
Yeah. So we'll see how, if they can find enough of those guys in the top 100 that have the ability to choose Penn State and also be able to forego some of those extra dollars.
And also, T. Frank, I'm going to add here, stick to your evaluations. Like that, go back to the beginning, stick to your evaluations. Don't take a guy just because you feel like you need to panic and take a guy. They've gotten away from that in the last couple of cycles, which is good to see. But now you think about it, for every guy that you bring in, you have to allocate a certain amount of capital for, like, and you can't just take a guy to take a guy anymore. Like, and that's that's what I'm thinking with like LeVar Arrington II is like, you can't just take that political take that guy. And I know LeVar has, a time from his NFL days and money from his NFL days and things like that. But you can't just fill out just because you need stars. Or we've seen programs that will take guys just because they have stars before their names. And those are the programs that are not successful. Like that is undoubtedly the wrong way to go about it. And I don't see Penn State panicking. I don't see Penn State doing that. I think sometimes you'd probably rather have an empty space in your class than take a guy that you have to allocate funds for. And 2 years down the road, he's going to hit the portal.
Right. We only got a couple minutes here left on the show. We got to get going a little bit early. One of the things I wanted to talk about, because I know the Lash Bash is one of the tentpole parts of Penn State recruiting for a lot of different reasons. It's become a very important part of the calendar, but the calendar is changing, Ryan. So as we look ahead to July and the Lash Bash, how do you see the future of that, knowing that in July there is this rule change? So can you start with what the rule change is and then what you think that means for Penn State?
I spent an hour yesterday calling around to try and get people's opinions on like how will these underclassmen barbecues work, because the rule change, to explain, there's a 1 week period at the end of July that we've seen for years now where, schools go pretty hard at recruiting. They host a camp or two. They'll host, as many recruits basically as they can before the season starts. And then, August has since turned into a dead period. It wasn't 4 or 5 years ago, but it has been for recent years. And, really, once that gets started, you're not seeing anybody back on campus until the season. Well, now July is going to be, the entire month of July is going to be a dead period. And what's interesting is I thought that was going into motion because they were going to have a summer signing period. And then I found it funny, like 2-3 days after I write that story, talking to Andy, Sean, about the summer signing period, the NCAA basically shoots it down and says,
you got that one out quick.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I'm happy we did at the time. But it looks stupid like 3 days later. Anyway, so they're not going to have a summer signing period for 2026. Like maybe it happens down the road, but it's not happening next year. And I think that's a big reason why the whole dead period of the entire month of July kind of went into motion, right? Because they knew, okay, well, we have our current class 80% full. Like, okay, we can take that break and now focus on the other teams, where now you're going to have to keep babysitting up until December. And, oh, by the way, they're going to go 2+ months with no recruits on campus. So what happens to the Lash Bash, T. Frank? I don't know. I don't think squeezing it into June is realistic, but at the same time, they might have to. They might have to because the way I was talking to sorry, I just saw your text. The way I was talking to people about yesterday, like for northern schools, it's hard to do a May date because you just don't know weather-wise, right? So it's rainy. I mean, look how rainy it was here in April and May. For Southern schools, it's a lot easier for them to do. So I think that's kind of has some people a little bit concerned. But you're also, remember, 10 evaluation days for camps. Well, now you got to cram all 10 of those into a 25-day period, basically. Unless if some things change where maybe you can have camps in May. That hasn't really happened yet. But long story short, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with the Lash Bash, but I do feel like they're going to have to figure something out because there's no way schools are going to stop doing that. Like there's enough momentum for the barbecues. Kids expect it. Kids like it that I think it's going to keep going. But man, think about, you got 4 official visit weekends. Now you're cramming, used to be like 6-7 evaluation days. Now you're going to basically cram all 10 of them in there. You're going to have to try and throw a Lash Bash into June. Like not having that week at the end of July really actually throws a lot more into June than I think people realize from the outside looking in.
So Fitz, there's going to be more recruiting rule changes after this. Once they feel the impact of this particular decision, there's more coming, right?
I still think May's like a wasteland. Like I don't know why May's not used more. And I get it. Like I just used the case of why, it's rainy oftentimes in the north, but like I just see a situation long term where like, yeah, maybe I get it. The coaches are out on the road. There's a contact period now in May. I understand all that, but I feel like in the second half of May, you can kind of slide up these camps, slide up these official visits, maybe spread it out a little bit more, and it'll work better, at least for a school like Penn State. But who knows?
I mean, in 2024, 2025, do we need the coaches on the road that much? Like,
no.
That's what it comes to. I mean, if you want to slice something off, take a couple of weeks of the evaluation period off because it's not as much of an evaluation period anymore as it is a recruiting period where you're going.
But the issue with that is because every school starts spring practice differently. You know what I mean? Spring, yeah. So like, there was did Rutgers finish like 2 weeks after Penn State, or I know there was a couple schools finishing like kind of later in April as far as their spring games go, and then they start the evaluation period. So that's why that window is so big. And, that because of trimesters and, when different schools start and all that stuff, it's hard to make that all
the same amount of time on the road. You just have to get it in so you get 4 weeks on the road, but you have to get it into that 6 or 8 week period is what it is. So everybody get the same amount of time, but it's just like, okay, great.
They chopped off the December.
We haven't stopped tracking the coaches on the road, but like for the most part, the impact of that has really gone down.
Right.
Yeah. I think what it boils down to is there are not enough days on the calendar to be a full-time recruiting element and a full-time coaching element for the 10 coaches that are coaching staff to do both.
But these coaches, I mean, you got to give them vacation. Like, and I know people don't want to hear that, but you got to give these, like, that's why you're going to keep losing coaches to the NFL without vacation, without downtime, essentially.
T-Fank, I got to go get my children soon. You want to wrap this up? Anything else you want me for?
I just wanted to say, what are we looking at for the next couple of days? What are we looking at for the next week or so? Programming note, I don't know if we're going to be able to do a live show next week. Greg was supposed to sit in, and Greg is on vacation, so we didn't get that done. But I don't know if we're going to be having shows next week. So as of now, the conversation we're having here is the last one you're going to hear until July...
I do, Brad.
15th. That'll be July 15th. So that'll be us. That'll be it for us. Guys, what are you looking forward over the next couple of days? Ryan, you go first so you can dip out whenever you need to.
We'll see if Arrington's going to make a move here soon. There's a lot of talk that it may happen here soon. Samari Reed was originally today. Now it looks like it's going to be July 4th. I don't really think it's going to be Penn State. Who were the schools, Sean, you were here? Like West Virginia?
Ole Miss and West Virginia were the two I was hearing. Kentucky's still in there. Clemson's still in there. Penn State's still in there in that top 5. So, those were the two that jumped out.
Yeah. Even with like guys like Reed and Kobe Howard and others, like Penn State, it's to me at least, it's all about trying to get Lex Cyrus and Taz Williams, right? I mean, that seems to be where they're focused on. Taz will be maybe in 10 days or so from now, July 13th range. Yeah. Lex seems like he's going to be sometime next week. We'll see. He's been kind of flexible, I guess we'll say, as far as trying to figure stuff out. So, sorry, T-Frank. We'll see. We'll keep an eye out. But like getting those two locked in is big. Trying to get trying to get a defensive tackle, I think, is really important. And yeah, I mean, this class is pretty much done. There's 10, 11 guys I think that are worth monitoring still. And Penn State should be able to get at least 3 of them. I think we will have a little bit of 2025 recruiting going into the season, but for the most part, this class is going to be just like last year. And maybe it won't be just Jalen Harvey who commits in October. Maybe it'll be 2 or 3, but for the most part, it's going to be 85-90% done in a couple weeks.
Zoe's going to be so mad at me. I'm going to take my laptop on vacation. I mean, if you're telling me that the 2 of the top receivers that Penn State's trying to get are going to be making decisions next week,
I don't want to hear it. I did like 16 stories at the beach last week, buddy. Take your damn laptop.
Yeah, Fitz, get us out of here. What's going on?
Going to disagree with Ryan. I think we are in for probably a more active late period than expected.
I'm just saying total commitments, but there's going to be flips. There's going to be a lot of flips.
Okay, there's 20 commitments right now, and they've got needs at 10 spots. They're not going to sign 30 guys, but like they're still going to go after a bunch of guys. But also they're going to keep their eyes on Brandon Finney. They're going to keep their eyes on guys that have gone elsewhere, because you never know in this entire environment. You never know when all that stuff is going to come crumbling down. And as we get closer to signing day, and I'll say this in twofold about Penn State's guys that they have committed from out of the region and the guys that they're going after in the region that are committed to out of region schools. That map gets smaller. It shrinks as you get closer to signing day, and you never know how those guys are going to react. So you just stay on them. You kind of go with it. Receiver, offensive line, Malachi Goodman, massive target right now, obviously, defensive line as well. And then, back into, a guy like Brandon Finney. Like that's where I'm looking. So I'm very curious to see the twists and turns at the end of this, because of all the unknowns and all the elements that come into it.
That'll do it for us today on the beat.
We're going to see 24 or so commitments in the next week or two, and then flip season will give us plenty to watch. That's what
I'm trying to get you out of here on time. I'm trying to
get you out of here. I got to get when Sean says I'm wrong, damn it, I got to get a jab back. Okay.
All right.
We're good.
All right. Well, happy 4th of July, everybody. Thank you to both of you guys for all your hard work and always being here and being flexible to be on the show. These guys really make all of this possible with all their inside information. Please reward them with joining us at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. It's $1 for 2 months of access. You can't get a better deal than that to get all that information, soak up all the knowledge from these two. And then whatever happens with the football season on top of that, no big deal. Just a really important 2024 season that could see the team see the college football playoff for the first time ever. Maybe give us a try. Code PSU1, 2 months for $1. I'm Thomas Ryan Carr, Sean Fitz, Ryan Snyder. We will talk to you